Told you it back. I am now back. This one, sorry about last video. If you haven't watched the last video, that's on perspective. This one's going to be on reflection. It's fascinating that reflection is something that I find it fascinating. This is where I've gotten to. As I certainly thought that this was a significantly more complicated thing, and the easy stuff was easier, as already done, and it's actually turned out to be the opposite of that, which will be the sort of the theory. I'll actually end up talking about that, I think, down here, and I call this the speed of light. So reflection. This is a fascinating one because, and we can use this example over here of how the world occurs to these two eyes, or how the universe occurs to these two eyes in a world where there's only two of them. It's just two people, or two eyes really, two me's and you's. You do need to look at that last video if you want to fully understand this one. It might go a little bit like this, there'll be missing pieces. I'll consider whether I recreate the whole, the structure of this so that, for every video. Anyway, in this world, in this universe where there's just two eyes, in this eye's universe, there's itself as a perspective, and it has a perspective of this eye. And this eye has a perspective of itself, and this eye, this perspective part. And the fascinating thing about this, when you actually look at these things separately, I'm going to try to do it over here. I might drop off the video, so maybe I can move the video. That's probably cool. Does that work? It does. You'll see the other side of my shed. So, if you look at that, this eye's perspective, so this is eye's perspective of itself. So we could say that's a little eye. So eye perspective of itself and eye perspective of eye. And both of those things have something to do with eye itself. Neither of them have anything to do with what's out here, which is fascinating because I can jump on the other side and if you didn't quite get that, I couldn't get that because it took me a little bit of time to get this for myself as well, or at least to even contemplate this, what's going on. What I'm saying is that when I'm looking at this, at the world, it's a reflection of what I am seeing, me. It's all me. There is no out there that isn't influenced by the way I see the world. It's all my perspective. Therefore, in almost every way, the world is a reflection of who I am, which is super cool. And if you've done any personal development, you'll hear that view used. And one of the things you might see or you might hear about in the world of personal development is that there's people out there that don't project your reality out. But that's just a bunch of nonsense. Because we're always doing that. I mean, blaming others for your situation is probably not a great idea. It's not particularly empowering. But that doesn't make the difference, doesn't change anything that, how the world shows up to you, including your view of yourself, is entirely predicated on your perspective. And your perspective is completely made up. You make that up, you decide. This person here decides their perspective of this other eye. This eye here decides this perspective of this eye. And this eye here decides this perspective of this eye. And one of the really fascinating things is that we go out into the world, and you can especially see it in kids in school, is that we have a perspective and we allow that perspective to be influenced by someone else's perspective. Never really getting that their perspective is just as flawed as ours. Never getting that their perspective is just a reflection of who they are. And we come back to reflection. And funnily enough, it doesn't matter where you sit on the spectrum of self-development and empowerment. You and every human being on the planet has a perspective that's a reflection of who they are. And we intrinsically understand it. And you'll often hear people, there's this lovely new term coming out called narcissism. It's not new, I get it. It's become a very fashionable narcissistic personality disorder. A fascinating conversation to have. And that often project, well, that's one of the clinical reasons for it in psychology. They project their reality a lot. They're very, very good at having other people step into their reality. In other words, like there's that term gaslighting, like that, the injection of an alternate reality, like to have people step into this completely false reality. But they completely get that the world is a reflection of how they show up. They're phenomenal at it. And the manifestors are the same. We intrinsically get this whether we are aware of it or not. The us versus them nonsense, the fighting, that's just intrinsic to human beings. It's immaterial. I mean, we love to waste our lives on useless nonsense, in my view, obviously, about fighting with each other and division and things like that. And we'll come and look at that. But it's fascinating to see that this one's reality is essentially all it. That's its reality. And this one's reality is there. They're two completely separate realities, predicated on another because they can't see each other. And if the two eyes weren't there, then there would be no reality for the other. There'd only be the reality of each individual eye, which I talked about in the previous video. So there's certainly a requirement, but those two realities are like enmeshed and separate. They're a reflection of each other. It's super cool to consider because the math is super, super simple. And that's the trick with this. This is why I'm trying to keep the math as simple as possible. The closer I keep it to one, the simpler this is. The closer I get to discovering this I, one, fear, me, perspective, divine. No, individual, sorry. I don't know where divine came from. Sorry about that. If I keep it close, I'll discover it. So I'll be back, not in the near future, like not today I don't think, maybe, to do attraction. It's a super important one. So see you soon.